Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We're super excited that you've joined us. We've got a great topic. Our topic is Accelerate Your Digital Transformation Journey with ServiceNow. My name is Mitch Ashley. I'll serve as your host and moderator. A few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, so sit back and relax. You'll be able to get an email with a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides. We'll share that with you after the webinar. Take a few notes if you want, but we've got some really great content, so I think you'll really want to engage with the speakers. And speaking of engaging, I know that our speakers really enjoy questions. We'd love to have you pop your questions into the either the chat or you can use the Q&A function. Either way, we'll catch your question and do our best to either answer it during the presentation or we have some time at the end. So we really enjoy talking with you and want to hear your thoughts and ideas. Speaking of which, we have a couple polls in today's session, so you'll have a chance there too. We're also giving away 4 gift cards at the end of the webinar, 4 Amazon gift cards. So stick around and find out if you're one of our lucky winners. So let's move on to our topic. Accelerate your digital transformation journey with ServiceNow. My distinct pleasure to introduce our 2 speakers, Jeff Summers, who is Senior Solution Sales Executive with ServiceNow, and Joe Offenberg, who is Senior Advisory Solution Consultant, also with ServiceNow. Jeff, I believe you're kicking things off. You're taking things first. I'll turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Mitch, and thanks to everybody for joining. We're excited about the hour that we have with everybody. We'll start with some introductions. My name is Jeff Summers. Been with ServiceNow for almost a year. Come to ServiceNow via a recent acquisition. I was responsible for sales in North America for a company called Sweegle. We were a pioneer in the configuration data management space. Been in DevOps, CI/CD, automated testing, cloud engineering for going on 8 years now. So very familiar with a lot of the challenges that probably many of the folks have that are listening today. Joe, you want to give a quick intro on your end and we can kind of jump in?
Sure. So Joe Offenberg, I was Jeff's technical counterpart over at Sweegle for North America, and we were acquired back in July. We bring the experience of working with the DevOps pipelines as well as automation and working with config data management into the DevOps solution. So I'm real happy to be here with you all today and share that solution with you.
Excellent. And just want to reiterate, if there's questions, anything that comes up, please put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. We definitely want to make sure we're answering questions at the end and people walk away with a good understanding of how we here at ServiceNow can really help accelerate digital transformation, which is a hot topic for most folks these days. So as we get started, if we could put up the first poll question, please. Very curious to know how quickly folks are adopting DevOps. Is it?
Yes, we have our poll is live. So everyone
Excellent.
who wants to join in,
please do.
My enterprise is adopting DevOps at the rate in which we'd like. Everything from strongly agree to strongly disagree. So if folks want to take a moment, pop your answer into the poll. We'd love to hear. We'll share with you the results in just a few moments here. Get a few more responses.
Perfect.
And as you mentioned, Jeff, hot topic, right? Accelerating digital transformation. I think every organization software team is really faced with that challenge. How do we keep pace with the needs of the business?
That's it. That's right. And then how can we automate some manual processes to ensure we can release faster? And that's going to be a big component of what we talk about today is, when you look at what's slowing people down, what's slowing DevOps teams down from releasing as frequently as they'd like, typically it's process, it's not tools. And so one of the most challenging processes most of our customers encounter is how do they automate the change approval process? How do they ensure that developers are spending their time developing, not inputting change requests or manually hunting down data for audits? So we'll talk about how we can help moving forward.
Great. Well, let's share the results of that poll. So the question was, my enterprise is adopting DevOps at the rate in which we'd like. We had 15% of responses strongly agree, 35% agree, so 50% are in that agree or strongly agree, 45% disagree, and then 5% strongly disagree. So good mix there. A lot of folks on the positive side, but an almost equal amount, well, really an equal amount on the disapprove.
Yeah, which isn't a huge surprise. I mean, we talked to a lot of large enterprise customers, and some of the challenges that they face are really related to how do we adopt DevOps more quickly? How do we transform? How can we continue to develop more quickly, release more features into production at a higher velocity? And how do we address some of the challenging manual processes that are slowing us down? So when we talk to all of our enterprise customers, and obviously ServiceNow is working with the biggest companies in the world, what we find is even though teams continue to adopt DevOps, they're not getting the increase in release frequency that they expected to. And again, a lot of that isn't tooling, and it's not knowledge, it's not expertise. It's the fact that there's some processes that are causing delays in the process. If you look at the developers, often over half of the time, 61% of the time, they're spending less than half of their day writing code. So, if you think about how can you accelerate development velocity, it's pretty difficult if your developers aren't spending the amount of time they should writing code. They're spending a significant amount of time on repeat, non-value add work, really keeping them away from doing what you're paying them to do and doing what the business needs, which is develop faster, release more frequently. And a big problem that causes the delay is the change approval process, which we'll talk about in a little while, as well as audits. Why are developers spending time tracking down audit data? That's not something that is high value to the business. So if we could put the next poll up, please.
There we go. That is active. Our question is, are we adopting public cloud at the following rate? Rapidly, slowly, and not at all. It's not a trick question.
What we find is these things correlate pretty closely. Is organizations that are rapidly looking at public cloud as an option, for infrastructure deployment, typically are really focused on digital transformation, focused on increasing the reach of their DevOps teams, and really also kind of struggling with the regulatory side of how do we ensure processes are put in place so that we still have GRC in mind, but we're not limiting our development team in terms of how quickly they can deploy.
Great. Well, just close the poll. Looks like, again, our question was, we are adopting public cloud at the following rate. 28% said rapidly, 56% said slowly, and 16% said not at all.
Yep, makes sense. And, again, from our perspective, if, there we go. Sorry, I lost the slide there. From our perspective, you really need to be focused on the speed and agility from a DevOps standpoint. We need to be able to enable the teams to release more quickly, enable them to really have true continuous deployments and faster reverts, and provide visibility and impact analysis into the team and deployment process. But one of the inhibitors to cloud adoption often is the regulatory side of things. So, how can we ensure continuous compliance? How can we expedite the audit process? How can we minimize outages to ensure that even though teams are developing quickly, releasing quickly, we're still compliant, we still aren't spending too much time in the audit process, and we're getting what we need from a compliance standpoint. The ops folks are happy as well. So that's kind of the focus of our DevOps product, is to allow you as the DevOps teams to go fast and not furious. So, kind of the first component of this, one of the long poles in the tent from an automation standpoint, is the change approval process. I'm sure many folks that are listening, when they see this graphic, can relate. Developers often are having to go from their tools of choice into to a new tool like ServiceNow to create a change request. By the time they actually get approval, get in through the cab, wait for their change window, and get through to deployment, it can be a 2, 3, sometimes 4-week process. So that's kind of counterintuitive to the whole concept of releasing more quickly. So from an automation standpoint, what we've designed is a way to, as we go to the next slide here, is a way to automate that process and take that from weeks to minutes. So what we find is about 85% on average of changes can be automated at most organizations. They're low risk, have a low impact to most systems. They're things that can be pushed through pretty quickly if there's an automation tool available to do that. And so as we get into the demo, Joe will show you how using ServiceNow, we can drastically reduce the amount of lead time in the process, but again, still maintain compliance as part of this. So if we go now to, would love to get into the last poll here as we get into kind of the audit discussion. Would love to hear how folks are, how automated this process is for folks.
Good. Our poll's active. Jeff, the question is, my change approval process is fully automated, partially automated, mostly automated, mostly manual, and totally manual. So we're already getting some quick responses here. So we should have some interesting results in just a moment.
Excellent. Appreciate the participation, everybody.
It is. It's a great way to kind of see where everybody's at and learn from, we all learn from each other. Organizations are maybe struggling with the same things I am. Well, let's close the poll. We've got some great responses here. The results were my change approval process is fully automated, received 4%. Partially automated is 22%. Mostly manual is 43%. So by far the majority of the organization. When you put the last response totally manual, now you're talking about 73%, either mostly or totally manual. So something that a lot of folks are considering how they do this. So timing is right to talk with you folks.
Seems about right.
Yeah, and that speaks to the genesis of this product. I mean, most organizations, this is one of the few things they haven't figured out a way to automate around, and there's just a ton of manual effort going in from a development standpoint, from a change management standpoint. A lot of resources being dedicated to something that, you automate away has a really big business impact. So, another component of this is that whole compliance part. The ops world of DevOps is equally as important. So it's obviously crucial to be able to develop more quickly, release faster, but we have to do it in a way where we can maintain continuous compliance and reduce audit costs. So as we get into the demo here, we're going to show you how we've got a data model that allows for automatic collection of consistent audit-ready data. We're allowing developers to stay in their tools of choice while gathering, all of the audit data as necessary. And again, the whole goal here is to give you kind of push-button audit access so that you don't have developers spending time tracking that data down. It's all available for you within the ServiceNow platform. So in addition to automating change approvals, to providing that push-button audit component, there's another piece of this whole process that's really important, and it's really getting the insights into what's working and what's not from a DevOps efficiency standpoint within your organization. So many of you, I'm sure, know the DORA Accelerate metrics. Very commonly widely accepted within the DevOps community is kind of the 4 critical KPIs for DevOps success. So front and center within our DevOps product, we display these, and really the secret sauce here, because there's a lot of DevOps platform or DevOps dashboards, out there. We've got all the operational data that can support it, so we can drive to a much deeper level in terms of the type of information we can provide, which again you'll see here shortly. So as we move along here, last slide I want to cover is really speaks to the business value. So it's great to have interesting technology. It's another thing to have something that's actually going to provide business value to your organization. And obviously, it's not something you can adopt if it's just fun. It's got to really move the needle from an ROI perspective. So one of our Global 500 international bank customers, really accelerated their DevOps adoption and used our product as part of that process. So their CIO highlighted at the beginning of last year an initiative to adopt DevOps across the organization at a much faster pace. And considering they're in fintech, highly regulated industry, they had some challenges, but that was one of the key things that their CIO kind of set their team out to go do last year. As a result, they were fairly mature at the time, but they realized they needed to address some specific processes that were causing some lengthy delays. And the change approval process was one of the ones that they identified first as really keeping the developers from releasing as quickly as they'd like. That 2 to 3 week change approval process for some of the more challenging changes was very much valid for them. They didn't have a lot of visibility into the efficiency that their DevOps teams worked. They had different tool sets for different teams, weren't sure if there was any correlation between what tools they were using and what the efficiency of the team and their output looked like. And they didn't have any audit history and didn't understand impact analysis for when changes occurred. So when you combined all of those things, when they found our solution, they were really excited. And what we found was the results were really compelling from when we started to work with them to when they were able to deploy and get into production. And so what they've seen is a 90% reduction in their developer change effort. They went from 4,000 hours down to 667 hours per month. And the manual effort required for audits went from 1,000 hours down to 400 hours. So, some significant business impact as a result of deploying the tool that Joe's about to show you. So with that, Joe, hopefully that's some good background for the folks here with us today, but I think we'll transition over to you so we can actually get into the good stuff, so to speak.
Sure, absolutely. So what I'm going to show you now is, exactly how we achieve this type of efficiency, right? Basically, I'm going to run through the data that we bring into the platform. So DevOps augments the CMDB that you're already familiar with, and we add data domains, right? Specific data domains around the development process, basically to give operational awareness to the operations side of the house, but also to provide metrics specific to those DevOps teams, those DORA metrics that help improve. So first and foremost, we bring in the commits from the Git platform. So whether you're using Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab, we could bring those commits into a common table, right, and normalize that data. We also bring in the work items from tools like Jira or like Azure DevOps. So if your developers are in Azure DevOps and they're being assigned work items, we're going to capture those as well, and or other tools, right? So, and they're going to be normalized. They're going to be normalized in our platform, meaning that regardless of where the data comes from, once it's in our platform, it falls into our fields and our tables. Same thing with the orchestration engine. So if you're using a tool like Jenkins or Azure DevOps pipelines or GitLab CI/CD, we can capture the execution of those pipelines, and that's where we capture a lot of the data that you're going to see. We can then use in the process for change automation. And a couple other areas are artifacts, right? So any artifacts that are being deployed as part of that process, as well as all the tests that get executed in the pipeline, we're going to capture the results of that. So this is additional data structures that have been added to the CMDB. And what we then want to do is map them back to the various teams and applications, right? So I can choose which pipelines, right, which repositories, and then which project plans might roll up to a specific application service, right? So this application service is one of the CIs you already have in your CMDB. Same thing, business application. So you can map to one or both. And we do that really for 3 reasons. One is impact analysis. When changes are coming through the pipeline, we want to understand how those impact other applications and services and related CIs. But we also want to know what type of governance do we need to apply? What set of rules do we need to apply to that change request, right? And then the third thing we want to do is use that data to delineate, the performance of the different teams. So that brings me back to the dashboard here, right? So what I could do is, based on the mappings of those objects and those commit items and work items from the Jira plan or from the Azure DevOps plans, we could determine which teams might need the most help. We were looking at successful deployments, right? How frequently are they deploying into the production environment, for example? What's the average lead time, right? This is basically when you click on a commit in Git, when you commit something to Git, how long does it take for that to make its way into production? And then, a couple other metrics you're already familiar with, like mean time to resolve and change failure rates. I've actually achieved the impossible here by getting my change failure rate down to 0, something you could probably only do in a demo environment, but that's something I'll have to fix with some more demo data, some more incidents here. And the idea is that these were the metrics that come from a book by Nicole Forsgren, and she was part of Google DevOps research and assessment project. And they came up with these metrics as the way to measure the performance of DevOps teams, but also, so they can find areas where they need improvement. So if you want to improve the lead time, or if you want to improve the mean time to resolve, the way to do this is with change automation, right? Is with improving the governance and the automation around getting a change request open and bringing it to production quickly, right? Because as Jeff was laying out, that's what's taking the longest. That's what's slowing everything down. And what happens if you can't speed it up, then unfortunately the development teams could actually bypass it. They'll start pushing things to production without the necessary rigor and attention that's required. So we want to make it automated so that it doesn't get ignored. So what I'm going to do now is show you how we can go through and automate that process. I have an application here. It's a website called Goldback, and this is like the careers page here where we're trying to entice new employees, right? So what I'm going to do is, perhaps there's an incident with this web page. Somebody can open an incident in the service desk, right? So let's start with that. Now, what I like about this demo is that you can really start at any point in the demo. It's kind of like a loop, kind of like that infinity loop that you see in those DevOps diagrams, right? So I'm going to start with the opening of an incident. The opening of the incident says, okay, the website data is incorrect, right? And then that's the incident. Somebody picked that up. Oops, I have a spelling error here. And then they'll submit that. First, they need somebody in the caller field. So let me go ahead and do that. Now, this is now a new open incident. Website data is incorrect. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, okay, this is now something that somebody in development needs to work on. So I'll update the state of this. Just by doing that, that's going to trigger a work item in Jira, right? So what that means is somebody gets assigned this. It's still an open incident in the service desk, but then what we do is we open a task in Jira so somebody could work on it. So let me go ahead and refresh this, and we'll see that should show up right here at the top of the page. Now, what happens next is somebody, in their Kanban board will then assign this work item to themselves and bring it into the time to do it. This is all happening in Jira. So the developers and the engineers stay in their tool, but after that, they're going to make some code changes, right? So let me go ahead into my repository here and make that change. So this is all, up until now, this is all your normal, DevOps process, right? So I'll make a change to the home page, so it's easy. Let's say we want to add some other new feature to this website. So we're going to say, let's add a yoga room here now, right? So that's going to show up. And should I spell it correctly? And let's go ahead and commit that. Now, when I commit it, what I want to do, I want to link it back to that Jira item, right? So this is GW43. And this is important because this is now a policy that I enforce within ServiceNow, right? Because if I'm not linking my commits back to my work items, that's going to show up in my change request that there are commits without work items. And I'm going to show you how that works. So we'll go ahead and commit this. And then typically what happens after there are commits, you get a Jenkins Bill, or you get some other orchestration engine that builds the application. So when I kick that off, you'll see there's various stages in the build, right? In this previous run, there was a setup stage where we bring all the data down from Git, then we build it. There's going to be some testing done, some static analysis done. We're going to validate the config, and then this is a step that's very near and dear to my heart, because this is using the technology that Spiegel brought into ServiceNow that does config data validation in the pipeline, right? And what's going to happen is when we get to this deployment step, we will open a change request. So let me show you a previous one, because that's going to take a minute, and show you what that looks like, right? So when we open a change request, and this one was from earlier today, first thing we're going to see, okay, this is assigned to a configuration item. There's something impacted by this, right? There are various data that we collect from the pipeline, okay? And a few things I want to point out about this data. Much of this data is already in the platform. So we have a combination of operational data like active incidents and recent outages, right? Current outages. How do we get this data? Well, when I bring in those tools and I link them to that DevOps record, remember, we link that back to your business service or your application service, right? And once we do that, we're able to traverse the CMDB and find all the configuration items that are related to that service. And if there's any problems with them, any incidents or outages, we're going to determine, hey, you know what? This is not a stable service. This is not a good candidate for automated deployments and automated change control. So let's look at that in a minute and see what happens there. If you have commits, there's some other commits that are here without work items. So remember, I said we try to enforce some policy, right, at the gateway to production, which is this change request. Because look what happens in Jenkins. When that build is reaching the deployment phase, what we're actually going to do is we're going to hold it up. We're going to say, hey, this job is now under change control, right? So we do this with a Jenkins plugin that says, okay, ServiceNow, we're going to try to deploy to production, but before we do that, we need a change request to go any further. Right? We can't deploy to production without the approval of a change request. So this job is now completely under control of ServiceNow, and because of that, we can then bring in all the data from the pipeline into this and do the analysis we need, right? So we're going to look at the test results from the pipeline. You'll see this here is test summaries, right? So JUnit testing, that Swiggle config data management test, some other types of tests end up in the pipeline. We also have some other policies like, hey, is branch protection enabled, right? We have a policy where if you're committing to the master branch, you can only do it as part of a pull request. So we want to make sure branch protection is turned on. In this case, we're not enforcing that. We're also looking at how many commits were there since the last merge, right? That's important because that tells us, how dynamic the application is. And if we are enforcing branch protection, we shouldn't see a lot of commits between the merges. And then transaction volume. This is interesting because this is now looking at the behavior and the active running application. So this is all data that we bring into the process. So this is operational data, development data, some business transactional data, and even some static analysis data from the development process. SonarQube is telling us how many bugs there are, making sure there are no vulnerabilities, and that's great. We have the data in the change request. It's all in one place. So if I wanted to manually approve this, I have everything I need to make that decision to approve it. But look, we're going to take it a step further than that. Because we look at this data, we're not asking you to attach PDF documents to the change request. We're not asking you to attach Excel spreadsheets, right? All of this data is coming in through the APIs in key value pairs, through our various plugins, right? And those key value pairs can now be analyzed using the policy engine. So what that means is we can, using the policy engine, I can say, hey, let's look at our quick start policy. This is the policy we give you as part of the demo data when you install the application. I can say, hey, these are the inputs to the policy. Everything I just told you, the commits without work items, the service criticality, the number of outages in the change request, number of outages in the last 7 days. These now can find their way into a table, a decision table, right? And what we see here is the first item in the decision table. These are processed in order. If we meet all of the criteria in this decision record here, right? And this is where we set the criteria. This is where we set the policy. The percentage of tests need to be 95% or greater, right? The number of outages in the last 7 days needs to be 0. This is all about stability. We want to make sure the change request is not in a conflict status, right? A conflict could be caused by 2 deployments going to the same CI, for example, or a scheduling conflict, number of outages, those kind of things. Transaction volume, branch protection. We want to make sure that's turned on. And, all of that is here. If we meet that criteria, right, then great. We can automatically approve this change request. And what would happen is this Jenkins job would just breeze through, maybe pause for a few seconds here while the data is analyzed in an automated way, and then continue on, right? But if it doesn't do that, we'll check the next thing. Maybe it's too high risk. Maybe the results of the test cases that are executed in the pipeline are too low, less than 75%. I don't need a human to spend time looking at this. I know right away I can reject this change request. I can say, this is no good, let's reject it outright. The third one is like a catch-all. If neither of the first two are met, we're going to escalate this for manual approval. But we do that in an intelligent way, based on the information we got by linking back to the CMDB and back to the CIs. We know who needs to approve this change request, right? We assign the correct approvers based on this governance policy that we put in place. And so those folks get notified, and this was approved. So by now, I should have a new one for this build here. You see it's in a scheduled state, but that means it's waiting for it to be manually approved. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and see a system administrator and one of the DevOps folks needed to approve it. I'll go ahead and approve it. And then the next thing we're going to check is is it in a conflict, right? Are there any conflicts? And in this case, we see that there's a CI already scheduled. Maybe this is a CI that's tied to multiple applications, right? Maybe this CI is used by another application that has another pipeline running in another by another team. So we can catch that here and say it's in conflict, or I can say, okay, you know what? Because I'm manually reviewing this, let's go ahead and that's not going to be a problem. Let's go ahead and override that and implement it and move it to the next phase. And then what happens is, even though there were those issues with it, I can override it and make sure that this change gets deployed. So that's the automation. The automation captures all the data from the process, it gets approved, and then we bring it into the we give it back to Jenkins to conduct the deployment. Okay. Any questions while I'm going through this? I think now would be a good place to do a little bit of Q&A. Another big part of the solution is the flow designer, right? So what we do here is this is what we use to augment the automation. So what we want to do is support your process as best as we can without having you to change your process. So for example, if you want to gather additional policy data from other places, like for example, to get the transaction volume, to simulate transaction volume, what I did was I added a REST call out to the Yahoo Finance API, right? I did that to grab a really big transaction number, which in this case happens to be the NASDAQ trading volume. So to simulate transaction volume, I'm grabbing the NASDAQ trading volume and adding it as a metric that I'm using for compliance. Now this is done, just as an example, just to show you how extensible it is to pull in external data from other platforms. I'm also getting SonarQube scan results as an extra step, and all of that makes its way back into the decision table right here in the process. So this is all configurable. I can add some more to it. Like for example, if I wanted to go back and update that JIRA ticket, right? I can add an action that does exactly that, right? So let me just scroll down here so you can see it. I add this action to, let's say, add a comment to the JIRA ticket. Okay, this build successfully completed and the change request was approved. Everything's great. And maybe I want to add another action after that to update, a Slack channel, right? So you see the Slack channel here, I grab that, and then I have all the methods to post a message to the Slack channel and really complete the automation so that I'm not, I'm not sending emails back and forth, really just trying to facilitate the communication at that point. So that is it. Back to the dashboard, there's tons of data here as far as bringing in information about the process. It's a very nice DevOps dashboard, not just for the DORA metrics, but it's one of the best dashboards I've seen that also includes operational data and system health data, right, on the same process relating to the same applications and teams as the development data, right? So that's a pretty unique combination that I think only ServiceNow is in a position to provide, because we have so much operational data, so much information about incidents and outages, and all the information that from the monitoring tools that took place, all the events that come in, and that makes its way into the dashboard as well. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, and I think it's a good point to take some questions here.
Yeah, we've got some really good questions. I know you've covered a bit of this, but I think it's worthwhile for you just to connect the dots for us again. There's a couple of questions actually from James. He's asking about how ServiceNow shows deployment to migration as it moves through dev, certification, staging, production, DR. These in a production environment, the process can be very complex or multi-stages. Can you show us how we would see that again?
Yeah, so what we're talking about there, and that's a function of the pipeline itself, typically. So in my case, I've added it to a single pipeline just to keep things simple. Where's my pipeline? Get back to here. Yeah, so like I'll do a staging deployment and a production deployment. You can open the change request at any point. So I can say, okay, let's deploy a change request here to the staging environment. In that case, the way you would link it back to ServiceNow is in that change request. The impacted CI would be the staging version of that application, right? So hopefully that would give you the information you need, and also relate that this artifact was deployed in that location. I hope that's clear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I do think really good. And actually another aspect of that question is, how do you handle the dependencies that are often involved in deployment? Things like scheduling, when the online systems have a closed window or something where you can do this certain amount of batch processing or sequence of multiple processes have to be at a checkpoint state where you can do a deploy. How do you manage that complexity?
Yeah, so the good thing about that is that capability is actually built into the change request itself. It's a core capability of IT service management of ServiceNow in the core platform to manage and schedule change requests. So what we're doing is we're leveraging that capability as part of the control we put over the orchestration, right? So if there's a maintenance window, or if there's a scheduled outage, for example, or a scheduled dependency, that's going to show up as a conflict, as I showed in the demo. And when that happens, basically what you see in Jenkins is that job will stay in a waiting state, right? So we won't deploy it until either the maintenance window is reached, or the scheduled deployment state is reached, or the conflict is resolved. Right?
Okay, really good. Yeah, they're great questions too. I mean, I think that's the kind of things all of us think about as we consider implementing something like this. If I can interject my own question, because I was thinking back to the poll that we had, where it was virtually half of our audience was still in a manual state and not doing automated change control yet. What are some of the typical barriers people are trying to deal with to take that first leap? And maybe it's not a leap, but a small step to start to begin automating. What are some of those challenges, and how can they get past those?
Yeah, so for most folks, the change request process is just not compatible with agility and DevOps, right? So what that means is that in order to be compliant, a change request would need a ton of information like I just showed you here. And typically that's added to the change request as attachments, as documents, as PDFs, as Excel spreadsheets and those kind of things. Plus, different development teams use different tools. So the way to gather that information is going to change from one team to another. So it becomes very difficult for the change reviewer or the business analyst or the change manager, right, to understand where to get the information, how much information they need, and what are the final results, how to tie it back to the pipelines. And that's what we're automating with the DevOps solution, is the collection of the information and also the ability to analyze that information through change policy.
Good. Jeff, I know I'm kind of throwing things at Joe here. Jump in if you'd act.
No, that's okay. You're asking the right questions to the right expert here. So.
Okay, good. Well, I know you jumped in on chat where we're answering some questions that folks have.
Yeah, good ones.
I had a question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, go ahead.
Well, I had another question about, James was sharing that my experience is that change records and audit records needs are not aligned or are difficult to find in a centralized location. You talked about the flow matching kind of a DevOps process and getting some of those tuned up. How about just getting those things together in one place where you can deal with them?
Sure. So what we do is, we think the change record is that one place, right? So we bring all the data in from all the different locations, and we visually represent it. Not just for the benefit of the development team and the folks on that side of the equation, but also for operations. They need this operational awareness of what's happening in these low environments, because today you're not worried about hard drives failing or running out of memory and those kind of things. It's all handled by cloud providers. All of the things that can impact your application are things like the provisioning capabilities and other things that are happening in the pipeline, right? So that's the kind of awareness we need to bring into ServiceNow, and then that's what the solution aims to do.
Jeet has the question of the day. How about a change rollback? How is that handled? I just did one of those the other day, so I can appreciate this question.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So what we do with, even without this solution in place, we would expect the rollback process to be handled by your deployment tools. But what we want to make sure is that we give those tools the information they need to determine whether, one, it's necessary to roll back, and two, whether a rollback is successful. So within the orchestration I showed you, based on the results, let's say at the end of this process, we can add a step to then monitor, or after we've deployed to production, let's run some tests on it. Let's run some Selenium test on it to make sure everything is good. If it's not good, we could then trigger that rollback, which hopefully is already defined as part of the deployment process, right? So as the orchestrator, as the high-level orchestrator of that, we can do that. And on top of that, we can update the change request and make sure everybody's aware of this. We could open an incident, and make sure the right team is assigned. We could have that incident, and as I did at the very beginning, have that incident assigned to the correct people in Jira. So all of those capabilities are there. It's just a matter of how do you want to execute that process.
Good. I know that, Jeff, I'm going to get you in here on this conversation. You were responding to a question that Andy had.
Yeah,
Andy
I was just about to bring that up.
That we can include chat ops to have dev and ops in there, talking as part of communicating. So what are the kind of things about that can really help this work together fluidly?
That's it. I think one of the big takeaways, hopefully, of today is we're not trying to displace any tools, whether it's part of the CI/CD tool chain, or whether it's internal communication tools. So, we've got the ability to include chat ops in this approval process and through the communication process, so that, if that's the preferred method to, incorporate this kind of automated change, that's something that we've already built out through the platform. So if you guys are using Teams, if you're using Slack, if you're using that kind of stuff, you want to incorporate, most of these approvals that do require some human connection with, that's one of the methodologies that we can use to do that. So, Joe, anything to add there? I think another good question, that kind of general questions have come up around integrations and, kind of our approach there. Maybe good to cover high-level integrations of what we currently have, and how we approach the myriad of DevOps tools in the marketplace right now.
Yeah, I saw the ADO question, so I brought up Azure DevOps to show we have the same level of integration there. And of course, we do GitLab, CI/CD, and GitHub is actually on the roadmap, and I think that should be released very quickly. We will have support for GitHub, and what that will do, it will bring in those pipeline execution events. And those, we have GitHub as a Git repository, that works fine. But the pipeline execution events coming from GitHub Actions, we're going to be bringing those into pipeline. We'll bring that data in as well. So that support is on the way. Yeah.
Excellent. That's great. A lot of folks are implementing those GitHub Actions. Let's see. There's a couple other questions I wanted to make sure we got to, because we do have some time to do that. if you're going to explain this to someone who isn't involved in details of the process, but you're explaining it to someone, maybe you're talking to a manager or a leader, how can you quantify how this is going to help them accelerate their migration to the cloud? What's it going to solve for them? Or they're going to see problems solved?
Yeah, so we quantify it based on developer productivity, right? Right, Jeff? So what we do is we look at how many developers you have, how much time are they spending gathering up all this data and helping the change approvers get the data they need, opening up the change requests, filling out forms, bureaucratic stuff. How much time do they spend doing that? And then figuring out with the automation, how much time we give back to them. And then the math is pretty easy there. So the return on investment is pretty easy to figure out. So it's all tied to the amount of developers they have and how much more productive we make them.
Okay, good. I think another important question we have here too is also talk about what it takes to get started, what it takes to get deployed or implement enough of the product where, the time to value question, where I start to see some results from it that are helpful.
Yeah, so this is something we've learned a lot in the past couple of years since we've launched the product, right? It's really helps to get the dashboard up and running first and start connecting to the DevOps tools. And it's really easy to connect to tools like GitHub, for example. Like in my example, I can connect just providing credentials to GitHub, and then I do a discovery. I see, I have 2,400 repositories. I don't need to onboard all those repositories to start getting the Git information. I could just turn on the ones that are relative to the projects I'm working on. But having this dashboard here is going to help you identify which teams will need the most help, which teams can benefit the most from the automation. So that's why I suggest get the dashboard up and running first, connect it to your tool, start collecting the data, and then identify the team that needs the most help and start with them, and then prioritize from there on.
Okay.
And typically we see that being, within 4 to 6 weeks you can start getting value, which is the great part of it. We can kind of take it team by team, pipeline by pipeline, and you can start getting value really quickly. Which
I would say 4 to 6 weeks, you should have 3 or 4, maybe even more teams onboarded already and collecting data.
Just my own experience, just eliciting the data, making that visual is a huge leap sometimes in and of itself, right? Getting it all in one place. So that's beneficial as well as the other things.
Mm-hmm.
So in talking about the dashboard, how would you describe what you have that's different from other products in the market? Dashboard's a pretty common thing, but it's more about what you put on it and the value of it and what it's useful for.
Yeah, there are a lot of good dashboards out there for DevOps. I think the differentiator we have, what makes us better, is our ability to get this operational data. We have so much of it. We have more of it than anybody, right? And tying it back to the same application services that we have, the commits and the pipelines and the work items mapping up to, is extremely valuable, because then you could see how those things happen in the DevOps pipeline. How is that impacting performance and reliability, right? And so that alone, I think, is what makes our dashboard better. It's just the tremendous volume of operational data we have, in addition to all the DevOps data we bring in.
Jeff, anything you want to add on that?
No, I think Joe's spot on. It's tying the two together that's so incredibly important. So, it's great to approach a problem from one angle, but if you've got, all the underlying data that may have caused it, now all of a sudden you've got a whole nother level of visibility that other dashboards just aren't going to have, because they're not so ingrained from an operational standpoint, like ServiceNow platform is.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So I don't know if we said this during the presentations or not. So how do people get started? Where do they go to find this out? What is it? How do they get going?
Yeah, absolutely. So, best way is to, connect with your ServiceNow platform owner, or if you've got a direct connection with your ServiceNow rep, obviously happy to initiate any kind of discussions, answer any questions, do more customized demos based on specific environments that customers may have or specific pain points that they're looking to solve. That's the best way to kind of go about getting more information and getting engaged with the team. And I saw there was There was an ask about licensing costs. That's definitely one to take up with your reps as well. It's kind of it's based on number of users is the metric that we use. So that at least gets you started from a how do we license it standpoint.
Good. There's another question too about the dashboard, getting a lot of attention today, about how customizable it is. Could you set up like an auditing dashboard or an audit dashboard, and then alerting, notifications, kind of capabilities that you could set up on different conditions?
Yeah, so the dashboarding is, this is actually another core capability of the platform that we're leveraging with DevOps. So, our developers created these widgets, right? Behind each widget is a set of tables and processes to collect the data. So there are other dashboards. There's tons of dashboards within ServiceNow, and I believe they're all ones for auditing and for global risk and compliance. I know that's a whole other product area with a whole other team of people that work on that. And I'm sure they'd love to share it with you.
Okay, excellent. I think we've covered our questions. So wonderful job, guys. great
questions, everybody. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, you can
tell.
It
makes it more interesting.
Yeah, it makes it real too. What the challenges are that we're all dealing with as part of our operations and DevOps deployment and development. So great stuff. We really appreciate both of you and your presentations and demonstration conversation today. While we have a few minutes left, we'll maybe give you back a little bit of time. Do want to cover who our winners are on our gift cards. We have 4 winners: Miranda C., Barbara H., Juan M., and Casey W. The good folks at DevOps.com will be in touch with you to get those gift cards. Also, just a reminder, we recorded our webinar today. We will send an email out to all participants so you have access to that recording, slides, etc. So you can go back and review this, maybe show it to a colleague, a friend, if you want to have some conversation with them, or maybe show your ServiceNow rep of what you were looking at and what was interesting to you that you want to pursue. Also, be sure to check out DevOps.com for all the different webinars that we have. Lots of good content on there, both on demand as well as upcoming webinars. It's been my pleasure hosting today. Really want to thank Jeff Summers, Senior Solution Sales Executive, and Joe Offenberg, who's Senior Advisory Solution Consultant. You could see those skills at work today, couldn't you? And with ServiceNow. Thank you, gentlemen. We especially want to thank you, our audience. We spent close to an hour together. I don't know about all of you. We're all working really hard, spending a lot of time working, doing important work. The fact that you would take an hour with us, we're honored, and we hope that we've used your time very well. On behalf of everyone here, have a great day. We'll speak to you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the time. Thanks, Mitch.